I don't like the idea that someone like Hanumanji, who's in the service of someone else, should be treated as this crazily aggressive god who allows people to think that they can hit Christians or Muslims over the head because they happen to be born Hindus. I think that's a ridiculous misinterpretation of our scriptures. Now, whether that is Hindutva in its pure form or whether it's a version of Hinduism, I don't care what it is. It's wrong.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. One of our best loved and most highly regarded novelists has just translated the Hanuman Chalisa, and here it is. It's an enchanting translation because it captures both the rhyme and rhythm of the original, which means it also captures something of the incantatory pleasure of the Awadhi and Hindi versions. Joining me now to talk about the Hanuman Chalisa and what it means to him is the one and only Vikram Seth. Vikram Seth, let me start with a question that I suppose will come to everyone's mind. What made you decide to translate the Chalisa?
I did it for my own pleasure some 10 years ago. I'm not quite sure what made me translate it. It's rather like when I translated some Chinese poets of the 8th century. I don't know what the impetus was. In that case, probably it was Tiananmen or something. In this case, it's not obvious to me. I translated a few Chaupais, maybe a Doha or two, and then slowly I realized that actually the whole poem was shaping itself. So I did the whole thing. It wasn't very polished. It was for my pleasure, and I showed it to my aunt who lives downstairs, my 90-year-old aunt. She would have been 80 at that time. And I left it at that. I didn't think about it much for 10 years. I did recite it once at the Patna Literary Festival, but it was basically a private pleasure, the translation was. I didn't want to publish it. I didn't want to do anything with it. Then Om, who's my publisher from Speaking Tiger, joined my aunt's chorus and said, "You've got to publish it." I said, but Usha Mami, look, it's going to be nothing compared to the original. She said, "You can't just keep it to yourself. Even if it's only 10% of the quality of the original, at least it opens a window to the pleasure of the original."
Tell me, why were you reluctant to publish it for over a decade? Most authors, when they've done something, are keen to get it out in front of the public. Why were you hesitant?
It's not typical of this. I've got a whole lot of manuscripts here and there, which I'm just thinking, is it worth publishing? Shall I publish it? That's part of the reason I've been so quiet. For example, just now, recently, I went to, I wanted to go to the Valley of Flowers, but my little Jimny kidnapped me and took me to Badrinath, and then there were landslides. So I then went to Kedarnath. So I went to all the four dhams, including Gangotri, and I wrote the whole thing up. Now, when I'll publish it, I don't know. Similarly, the other works, some are okay, some are not okay. But I'm concentrating on writing a suitable girl and its attendant novels, so I don't want to get too involved in publication. I thought that this would be a simple matter. Just put the Hanuman Chalisa out and let it make its own way in the world. I didn't think that I'd have to do interviews.
Now, you reveal in your introduction that
Yeah.
you did the translation using both rhythm and rhyme because I wanted to convey something of the incantatory pleasure of the original. You've done it very successfully, but tell me, how difficult, how challenging was it?
Now, it was challenging for one main reason, which is that the rhythm of the Hanuman Chalisa is a falling rhythm. It goes ta ta ta, like Jai Hanuman Gyan Gun Sagar. And in English, we don't have a lot of falling meters. It tends to be a rising meter, like to be or not to be. That is ta tum, not tumty tumty. And so this, particularly with the rhyme, like oh, I don't know, Pira Balbira or Ujagar Sagar. These falling rhymes, these feminine rhymes, are rare in English. So that put a bit of a constraint on me. Other than that, it was a pure pleasure, and I didn't mind failing. After all, I was just doing it for myself. So it wasn't as if I had a deadline or I had a publisher breathing over my shoulder. If it didn't work out, I'd have left it then, or not completed it, let's say. Anyway, I get pleasure from the original.
Let me quote the 19th Chaupai.
Okay,
Ram's ring in your mouth, you leapt over the ocean. Who'd be surprised by your strength and devotion? To
that's
me,
right.
and I want to
Prabhu Mutrika Leli Mukhmahi Jaladi Langahi. Ha Acharaj Nahi. Something. That's right. That's the thing. But I mean, it's a bit. It's Acharaj. That's right.
to me, and I imagine to
Yeah.
most of your readers, that
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a translation, but as if it's the original written in English.
Oh,
How
that's very nice of you to say so. But really, it's a pale shadow of the original. Still, if it conveys something of it, that's great. I appreciate what you said.
and that's what I was going to ask you. How difficult is it to achieve that quality and feel that what is a translation actually feels as if it's the original in English?
Well, someone. Well, this is prose as opposed to poetry, but Gopal Gandhi translated A Suitable Boy, the novel, into Koi Achha Sa Ladka. And Harish Trivedi, I think, was a critic, and he said this is one of those translations which is like a carpet, and you can't tell which side is the original. You turn the carpet upside down, and you think it reads like and Gopal Gandhi's translation is a really wonderful translation of A Suitable Boy. So now with poetry, of course, one can't hope for that. But if on the other side of the qaleen, on the other side of the carpet, you can get some sense of what the true pattern, the shadow pattern is, then that's great. I mean, if you can convey, if it reads as if it's a poem in its own right, that's wonderful. That's true also of, say, the translation by Charles Johnston of Pushkin's Eugene Onegin. Now, I was enchanted by it. That's what made a novelist out of me. In fact, I wrote my first novel based on that particular rhyme and meter. It read like a poem in the original. Now, Russians tell me, oh, it's nothing like the beauty of Pushkin. But if I got so much out of it, that's okay.
Now, your book is dedicated to Bhaskar, who you
Mhm.
describe as the precocious young mathematician in A Suitable Boy who learned the poem before he was 5. You must be the first author to dedicate a book to a fictional character, even though he's one of your creations.
Uh, no, there was an author before me. His name was Vikram Seth, and he dedicated the Hindi translation, the one I just mentioned to you, to Mrs. Mahesh Kapoor. Because Mahesh Kapoor was the much put upon wife of this rather acerbic politician, Mahesh Kapoor. And she was a very gentle spirit. She concentrated on her household and her puja and taking care of refugees and so on and so forth. And she couldn't read English. She couldn't speak English. So I said I dedicate it to her because she couldn't have read my original, but she would have probably got some pleasure out of Koi Acha Sa Ladka, even if she didn't get it out of A Suitable Boy. I can't think of any other precedent. So.
And you chose Bhaskar in this instance because
Yeah.
he knew the Hanuman Chalisa before he was even 5.
Absolutely. Not only did he know it, but he acted in as part of the Vanar Sena in the Ram Leela in Brahmpur. And just like kids. I mean, he's a mathematician, but he also took part in all these other fun activities as kids do.
Tell me, is there an eccentric in the poet and the novelist sitting in front of me?
It's not for me to examine my own nabhi, as they say. Um, I see myself as very well centered, but of course, I may be elliptical rather than circular.
Let's broaden our discussion a little. What does the Hanuman Chalisa mean to Vikram Seth?
Almost too personal a question. I mean, I recite it for pleasure, but then I recite a lot of things for pleasure. Do I uh, believe in Hanumanji as an actual being or as a kind of an indicative or an imaginary being like characters, a character, a mythic being? I don't know, but for me, the real attraction in this particular case is Tulsidas's poem, which is so mesmeric. Um, for my aunt, Usha Mami, she recites it twice before going to bed every night, and she says whenever she has a problem or something, it gives her courage to recite it. For me, I tend to recite it more as a poem and as part of my culture. If I had to choose a god whom I actually take the blessing of, is more likely to be Ganeshji than Hanuman.
In your introduction, you say, and I'm quoting you,
Hmm.
nothing could be further from the humanity and inclusivity of the best of Hinduism than the self aggrandizement and willful cruelty of those who use the religion in which, in the lottery of life, they happen to be born in order to attack or demean others. You're distinguishing, I get the feeling, between Hinduism and Hindutva. How do you view Hindutva?
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of the worship of Hanuman, there were times when, I suppose, in the 10th century, when it increased, it was probably a reaction to, just as the Hinduism had sort of pushed out Buddhism. So Islam was coming in the north, and maybe people thought that they wanted a more protective, aggressive version of Hanumanji. I think basically my take, such as it is on Hanuman, is that he had so many different versions. In fact, it says in Tulsidas, Sukshma Roop Dhare, Siyahi Dikhawa, Vikat Roop Dhare, Lanka Jarawa. And so I don't like the idea that someone like Hanumanji, who's in the service of someone else, should be treated as this crazily aggressive god who allows people to think that they can hit Christians or Muslims over the head because they happen to be born Hindus. I think that's a ridiculous misinterpretation of our scriptures. Now, whether that is Hindutva in its pure form or whether it's a version of Hinduism, I don't care what it is. It's wrong.
You know, Hindutva is not just the mantra, but it's the ideology of the Modi government. Can I ask you, how do you view the government that was elected earlier this month?
Well, it's Modi is our prime minister, and he can do a fair amount, and especially if he can control the home ministry, which of course he does. Um, but there has been some kind of a balance now with in the middle sits M, but there's an N on either side to Naidu and Nitish to kind of make sure that I think the worst of the anti-Muslim, not even wolf whistle. It's actually pretty direct. The kind of slurs and imputations and so on that he was making. I think that'll be somewhat diminished. After all, in 2000, no, not 2004. That was in let's say the first BJP or NDA government, let's call it, it was a coalition, and there were parties like the Samta and so on. George Fernandez, a Christian, they didn't do too much of that kind of stuff, and I think it only weakens India. Quite apart from whether it weakens India or not, it is inhumane and illogical to consider any of our fellow Indians, no matter what religion they belong to, as worthy, any less worthy of citizenship or full regard as we are, as we happen to be. You mentioned, I use the phrase, in the lottery of life.
Let me pick up on what you're saying, Vikram Seth. There are some who say, and in a
Mhm.
sense you echoed that in this answer, that because he's lost his majority, because his attempts to polarize the country didn't meet with the sort of success he was hoping for, he's been rebuffed and Modi will be a constrained prime minister. But there are others, like Pratap Bhanu Mehta, for example, who say that he's a wounded tiger, and wounded tigers can be vicious and vengeful. How do you see the third term that's beginning?
It's possible. I mean, there's absolutely absurd things. Some one or two things have been done. So, for example, this case against Arundhati. Now, whether that's a distraction or whether it's a reassertion of the idea that we can get you no matter where you are, and somehow we can suppress you no matter what you do, even if you did it 10 or 12 or 13 years earlier, it shows a kind of insecurity, I think, that sort of attitude. Now, I won't go into the psychology, and Bhanu Mehta might be right. I mean, people, one must remember about Modi that he is a very pragmatic politician as well as an ideological one. So he will probably adjust. I don't really know whether, uh, and if he does try a couple of dangerous things, I think people will be a little more resistant. than they have been. People have been really working in an atmosphere of fear and subservience also. I'd say with the media particularly, would not be too strong a word.
Were you ups
Particularly TV media.
were you upset, annoyed by the way Arundhati Roy was treated by this government? Or were you, in a sense, at the back of your mind, anticipating that this sort of thing, maybe not to her specifically, but this sort of thing is likely to continue?
I wasn't making any. I wasn't making any predictions, or I wasn't anticipating anything. I just reacted to the fact that it happened. I was quite surprised, frankly, but maybe well, one shouldn't be too surprised by that sort of thing. After all, the courts they have been cowed. The press, and especially the television media, has been cowed. Um, Many of our artistic and literary institutions have been thought to be cowed. Um, and there was another thing I was going to say, but it slips my mind. Oh, yes, business people too, of course. If you can organize a raid on anyone by the enforcement directorate or something, then obviously people think that there's an aspect of crony capitalism which has come in. We have much more serious matters now. We have matters of, you know, poverty and of employment and to some extent of inflation and of not using our demographic bonus that we've got, of which, unlike China, we have a large cohorts of working age people who are, I'm speaking now with my economics hat, large people of working ability who are passing through through their years without a job, without either the dignity of a job, without the money that comes from the job, without the support of a job, without the interest of a job, without the purpose of a job. I think that's a very difficult situation. Now, I can't say the government should make work for people, but it should at least create a situation where you can't take totally arbitrary decisions which impoverish the country, like monetization, or so favor some business houses and so threaten other business houses that they can't participate fully in the economy, or for that matter, not create such ease of doing business that self-employed people, individuals, self-employed people can't work properly. I mean, India's a very enterprising. We have a great deal of entrepreneurship, and that's important. The other thing, of course, is the agricultural sector. I'm sorry, this is taking me rather far afield from the Hanuman Chalisa, but the agricultural sector, whether it's the actual farming policies or the alienation of farmers, or whether, on the other hand, it's the fact that those people who've, at great cost to themselves, educated their children, maybe sent them to the city, find that this kid can't get a job. So these are serious problems. And on top of that, the hatred that has been created against fellow Indians, which will take such a long time to seep out of our veins. All I can say is, well, look at Germany, where a, a party sought to create hatred against the Jews, but then 15 years later, one doesn't see that. So let's hope that in India also, the younger generation does better than we've done.
You've spoken of a series of categories of people who have been cowed down: authors, journalists, the media, the judiciary, opposition politicians. You've also spoken
Religious minorities.
religious minorities in particular. You've also spoken about challenges and problems that lie both on the industrial and the agricultural horizon.
Correct.
Novelists are renowned for the fact that they see the world differently to the rest of us. They perceive it and see it differently. What are you most apprehensive of when you look down the road to the next 5 years?
I really think it's what I'm most apprehensive. I can mention two areas of apprehension. One is that the main thing in my mind is the bitterness that has been created between one Indian and another, quite deliberately, quite calculatedly. That is something a house divided against itself cannot stand. Quite apart from that, it is simply inhumane, illogical, wrong. The other thing is is more of a structural matter. It's got to do with numbers in parliament and how an opposition can coalesce into something that is more unified than a group of parties that have been brought together, because if they don't hang together, they will assuredly hang separately. They've learned that lesson, the numbers game in a first past the post system, and they've got 232 seats, which is pretty creditable. But are they going to react? Had they formed a government, I'm afraid what might have happened, and I hesitate to say this because uh, I fear that what might have happened is what happened after 1977. That is, they threw out someone who was in danger of becoming a dictator, and to some extent had become a dictator, Indira Gandhi. But then they fought so much among themselves in the Kaun Banega Pradhan Mantri that 3 years later she came back in. Now, if that were to have happened and, say, in India, INDIA had formed the government, I fear they may not have stuck together properly, especially since Congress wasn't a dominant party like it was in earlier coalitions. Now, in 5 years, my concern is that they may be prized away from each other, or alternatively, that they may seek to prize one of the secular parties like Nitish or Naidu away from the government. I think we need a period where the worst attitudes of the ruling party are constrained, but that there's not too much politicking in that sense of trying to buy and sell a larger version of what happened, for example, in Maharashtra.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Before I end the interview, Vikram Seth, let me ask you two questions about your books.
Sure.
Earlier in this interview, you talked about the journey you took in your Jimny, which was a sort of journey along the Char Dham Yatra route.
So
I gather you have written a book on it, and I gather the working title is Northern Thumbs, and it's
the
com-
northern.
and it's
Uh,
coming out in October. Would this
no,
be?
no, it's not coming out. I'm not publishing it.
Oh, it's
I've
not
just,
coming out in October.
I don't think so. Who's told you that?
That's
No,
what I
no.
was told.
Well, if it's in the newspapers or if it's on TV, it must be true. Not at all. I've shown it to my aunt. She's the only person who's read it. And I've shown it to one other person. And that's it. There's no question of it coming out. I've got a book to write.
So I was misinformed, but I was told it's coming out in October,
Uh,
that the working title is Northern Thumbs. And
Well,
I was
still
going to
working.
say to you, is
Uh,
this a return to travel writing after what must be almost 4 decades?
well, I suppose it is a return to travel writing. Actually, what happened was that after I returned, Usha Mami said to me, Look, darling, why did you write an account of this?" So I said, "Well, when I'm writing this other book," she said, "You'll forget the details of your journey if you do that." It was an accidental journey. Actually, what happened was, Karan, you and I know and love Gurdial Singh, right? Our housemaster and geography teacher. And he had always told me to go to the Valley of Flowers. So that's why in July and August, when it's most rainy and most landslidey, but when the flowers are in bloom, I decided after his death, I am definitely going to the Valley of Flowers. So it was a bit of a pilgrimage on his behalf. So I went there, but I couldn't get across the river. There were all kinds of landslides. I couldn't get there. So the Jimny said, look, my nose is pointing towards Badrinath. Let's go there. So I said, absolutely. And my driver is also quite sort of dharmic. So we went there. Then when I came back, I found I could go to the Valley of Flowers and also went to Hemkund Sahib. Then when I came back, I found I couldn't get it was Independence Day, and I couldn't get beyond Joshi Mutt because there was another landslide. So then I thought finally, okay, let's sit in Oli for a couple of days. And after that, a number of landslides later, I found myself going to Kedarnath and then Gangotri. And having gone to the three of them, I thought, chalo Yamnoti kar lete hain. And then finally, I came back to Noida. So it was an accidental journey, and actually, it was in the wrong direction. Strictly speaking, I should have taken the water of the Ganga and the Jamuna, and then chadhawed it at the feet of Shivji and Vishnu. But I did it in the wrong direction. Fine, it happened that way.
I sincerely hope that what you call my misinformation turns out to be accurate and true, because I think this particular book,
Yeah.
whether it's actually called Northern Thumbs or not is another matter, would be fascinating for the audience.
It would be actually, it reminds me of the Travels with My Donkey. I feel it's rather like Travels with Jimny Mata or Jimny Devi or maybe Jimny Kumari. She's a young bride. She said, I want to go off here and there. I said, look, I'm an old man. You can't just take me wherever you want. She said, rather willfully. She said, no, we're going here or there.
Finally, what about A Suitable Girl? Your fans are aching to read it, but it seems much delayed. I hope you haven't given up on it.
Absolutely not. That's part of the reason why I told my publishers I'm not giving any interviews. Then people like you sort of twisted my tail on the basis of friendship and said, "Hey, how can you do it?" So I'm giving all these interviews. Otherwise, I'd be sitting in, I'd be immersed in Girl at the moment.
So, do we have a deadline for The Suitable Girl?
I hesitate to say so now because I've given a number of deadlines and they've gone past. And all my books take a bit longer than expected. In this case, much longer than expected. But well, it's the only thing I'm working on at the moment. I've done my the Northern Dhams, and I've published the Hanuman Chalisa, and so let's hope that now the girl will. I'll devote myself to her for a bit.
So, in the fullness of time, if I can put it like that, the girl will be born.
In the fullness of time, indeed, the girl will be born. We be certainly, yeah, absolutely.
Vikram Seth, a pleasure talking to you. I'm delighted that you were persuaded to agree to this interview. Take
Thank
care,
you.
stay safe, and happy working on that beautiful girl.
Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.